Before the world knew empires, before the birth of the great religions, before borders were drawn and redrawn in blood and ink, there was Palestine. A land not only of conflict and controversy, but of civilizations and sacred stories, where prophets walked and kings rose and fell. Palestine, a strip of land no larger than some modern cities, and yet it holds within it the weight of millennia, a place where geography and faith collide, where history is a battleground of memory, and where the past is always present. Our story begins over 3,000 years ago, in the Bronze Age, when this region, known broadly as Canaan, was inhabited by a collection of Semitic-speaking peoples. These early Canaanites were city dwellers, traders, farmers. They lived in city-states, each ruled by its own king, often clashing with Egyptian and Mesopotamian powers. By the 12th century BCE, a new group appears in historical records, the Philistines, likely seafaring migrants from the Aegean who settled along the southern coast. Their name would eventually be echoed in the Roman designation of the land, Palestina. At the same time, a people known as the Hebrews emerged inland, forming small tribal confederations. Over time, they would unite into kingdoms, first under Saul, then David, then Solomon. Jerusalem was chosen as a capital, a spiritual and political center. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom split in two: Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Empires came and went: the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. Each conquest reshaped the region's identity. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in Jerusalem, exiling many Hebrews to Babylon. A traumatic event, yet one that would forge the foundations of Jewish identity in exile. Then came the Persians, and with them, a brief return and rebuilding of the temple. But history marched forward. As Alexander the Great swept across the Middle East in the 4th century BCE, he brought with him more than military dominance. He brought Hellenism. Greek culture, language, philosophy, and architecture flooded into the Levant, including Palestine. After his death, his empire fractured. Palestine became a chess piece between the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. During this era, tension brewed between traditional Jewish practices and Hellenistic influence, culminating in a rebellion. This was the Maccabean Revolt, a fight for religious freedom that led to the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty, a rare period of Jewish sovereignty. But internal strife and the rise of external threats brought a new superpower into the story: Rome. By 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey entered Jerusalem, and though the Hasmoneans remained nominally in control, true power rested with Rome. Eventually, under Emperor Herod the Great, a Roman client king, monumental architecture flourished, including a magnificent renovation of the Second Temple. But tensions between the Roman rulers and the Jewish population continued to simmer. In 70 CE, following a massive Jewish revolt, the Romans crushed the resistance and destroyed the Second Temple, an event that would forever shape Jewish memory. Later, in 135 CE, after another rebellion led by Bar Kokhba, Emperor Hadrian took a drastic step. He renamed the province from Judea to Syria Palestina, deliberately erasing its Jewish associations. Jerusalem itself was refounded as a Roman colony, and Jews were largely banned from entering. The name Palestine thus re-entered history, not as a reflection of the Philistines, who were long gone, but as a Roman political statement, and it would remain, in various forms, under the control of empire after empire. Christianity took root here, particularly after Emperor Constantine converted in the 4th century. Churches rose atop sacred sites. Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem became destinations for pilgrims. Then, in the 7th century, everything changed again, when a new faith swept across the desert sands. In 638 CE, the Muslim Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab entered Jerusalem. There was no bloodshed. The city surrendered peacefully, and with that, Palestine became part of the Islamic world under the Rashidun Caliphate. To Muslims, Jerusalem was already sacred. According to Islamic tradition, It was the site of Al-Isra wa al-Mi'raj, the miraculous night journey of the Prophet Muhammad. Upon this site, the Dome of the Rock was constructed in 691 CE, followed by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, forever solidifying Jerusalem as the third holiest city in Islam. For centuries, under the Umayyads, Abbasids, and later Fatimids, Palestine thrived as part of a vast Islamic empire. Towns like Hebron, Nablus, and Ramla became hubs of trade, learning, and religion. Christians and Jews were considered dhimmi, protected, though second-class religious communities, but the peace would not last forever. In 1099, the Crusaders stormed Jerusalem. What followed was a massacre. Men, women, and children, Muslim and Jewish, were slaughtered. A Christian kingdom was established, but its hold was fragile. In 1187, the tide turned. Salah al-Din, known in the West as Saladin, a Kurdish Muslim leader, reclaimed Jerusalem after the Battle of Hattin. Unlike the Crusaders, he allowed the city's Christian inhabitants to leave peacefully. Under Saladin and the Ayyubids, Muslim rule was restored. In the centuries that followed, Mamluks, then Ottomans, ruled the land. Under the Ottoman Empire, which took control in 1516, Palestine became part of the province of Greater Syria. It was a diverse land, Muslim majority, but home to vibrant Christian and Jewish minorities, speaking Arabic, Turkish, Armenian, and more. For the next 400 years, Palestine remained relatively stable under Ottoman rule. Villages expanded, towns grew, and holy sites were preserved. Pilgrims from all over the world continued to visit. But beneath the surface, change was coming, fueled by nationalism, colonialism, and global war. The 19th century brought new players to the region. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, European powers looked east with ambition. French missionaries, British archaeologists, Russian pilgrims all began to take a keen interest in the Holy Land. Meanwhile, a new ideology was rising in Europe, Zionism. Born in the late 1800s, Zionism was a political movement advocating for the return of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland, spurred by rising anti-Semitism in Europe, including violent pogroms in Russia. Jewish communities began migrating to Palestine in waves known as the Aliyahs, purchasing land, establishing settlements, reviving Hebrew. At the same time, Palestinian Arabs, Muslim and Christian, were also awakening to their national identity. While they lived under the Ottoman flag, a sense of local and Arab belonging began to grow. Then came World War I, and with it, promises and betrayals. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, a letter expressing support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Yet that same Britain had already made conflicting commitments. In secret, it had negotiated the Sykes-Picot Agreement with France to carve up the Ottoman lands, and in parallel, it had promised Arab leaders independence if they revolted against the Ottomans. When the war ended, the British took control of Palestine under a League of Nations mandate. To the local Arab population, this felt like occupation. To many Jews, it was the long-awaited return. The 1920s and 30s saw a rise in both Jewish immigration and Arab resistance. Tensions escalated. Land purchases displaced tenant farmers. Protests erupted. In 1929, violence broke out in Hebron, where dozens of Jews were killed. In turn, many Arab villages faced brutal crackdowns. The British found themselves in an impossible position, caught between two nationalist movements. As tensions flared, Britain issued immigration limits, hoping to appease Arab opposition, but the damage had been done. Then, the world plunged into World War II. The Holocaust decimated European Jewry, and global sympathy for the survivors grew. For many Jews, Palestine remained the last hope, but for Palestinian Arabs, the influx of immigrants felt like a looming erasure. The streets of Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa braced for the storm to come. By 1947, the situation in Palestine had become untenable. The British, exhausted by decades of unrest, handed the problem to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a bold solution: partition. The plan divided Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international control. To many Jews, this was a miracle. After centuries of exile, persecution, and genocide, they were being offered a homeland. But to Palestinian Arabs, it was a catastrophe. They made up 2/3 of the population, but were allocated less than half the land. Worse, the plan gave the Jewish state some of the most fertile and strategically important regions. The Arab world rejected the plan. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel. The very next day, 5 Arab nations invaded: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, beginning the First Arab-Israeli War. Israel survived. In fact, it expanded, capturing more land than the UN had originally allotted. But the war came at a terrible cost. Over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes in what Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. Hundreds of villages were depopulated or destroyed. Entire communities became refugees overnight. Most fled to the West Bank, then annexed by Jordan, Gaza, controlled by Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and beyond. Many believed they would return within weeks. Decades later, their descendants still wait. In the years that followed, the Middle East hardened, borders shifted, fences rose, the wounds deepened. In 1967, the region erupted once more in what would become a turning point in Palestinian history. During the Six-Day War, Israel launched preemptive strikes against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In less than a week, it seized control of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights. For the first time since 1948, Israel now ruled over millions of Palestinians, this time as a military occupier. The West Bank and Gaza Strip became flashpoints. Israeli settlements began to rise on land that Palestinians hoped would form part of their future state. Checkpoints, curfews, and military patrols became a part of daily life. With nowhere else to turn, Palestinian resistance took new forms. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was formed, initially with the goal of liberating all of historic Palestine through armed struggle. By the late 60s, Yasser Arafat, leader of the Fatah faction, had become the face of the movement. International hijackings, guerrilla attacks, and cross-border raids made headlines, while Israel responded with crushing reprisals. Meanwhile, Palestinians in exile remained stateless. Refugee camps swelled across Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to root out the PLO, leading to a brutal siege of Beirut and the Sabra and Shatila massacres, where hundreds of Palestinian civilians were killed by militias allied with Israel. But something changed in 1987. On the streets of Gaza and the West Bank, ordinary Palestinians, teenagers, shopkeepers, mothers rose up. With stones in their hands, they faced tanks and tear gas. This was the first intifada, or uprising. It was grassroots, spontaneous, and it shook the world's conscience. International pressure mounted. In 1993, on the White House lawn, a historic handshake stunned the globe. Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, under U.S. mediation, signed the Oslo Accords. The agreement established the Palestinian Authority and laid the groundwork for a two-state solution. But peace proved elusive. Extremism surged on both sides. In 1995, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli ultranationalist. In the years that followed, settlement expansion continued. Trust eroded. Then came the Second Intifada in 2000, this time deadlier, bloodier, and longer. Suicide bombings, targeted killings, military incursions, violence gripped both peoples. In 2006, a new player rose. Hamas, an Islamist group rooted in Gaza, won parliamentary elections. By 2007, a bitter civil conflict between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority split the territories. Hamas in control of Gaza, Fatah ruling the West Bank. The divide remains to this day. Today, the land once called Canaan, once Judea, once Roman Syria, Palestina, now fragmented between Israel, the occupied West Bank, and the besieged Gaza Strip, remains a flashpoint in global conscience. In Gaza, over 2 million people live under blockade, one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, with limited access to clean water, electricity, and medical aid. Periodic wars have left entire neighborhoods in rubble. Civilian casualties mount with every flare-up. In the West Bank, Israeli settlements have grown steadily. considered illegal under international law by most of the world, but supported by many in Israel. Checkpoints, military raids, and land seizures are routine. For many Palestinians, freedom of movement, access to education, and even the right to build a home are wrapped in layers of permits and red tape. In Israel, security concerns remain paramount. The scars of terrorism and war run deep. Israeli citizens live with the threat of rockets, stabbings, and political instability. The trauma of the Holocaust still shapes national policy and identity. Meanwhile, Jerusalem, claimed as a capital by both peoples, remains a city of sacred tension, where every stone tells a story and every prayer echoes both hope and sorrow. Peace efforts have repeatedly stalled. Generations of negotiations, summits, and international interventions have failed to deliver a lasting solution. The idea of a two-state solution, once the bedrock of diplomacy, now feels more distant than ever. And yet, life continues. Palestinian artists paint resilience on walls. Israeli and Palestinian activists march side by side. Children play beneath separation walls. Students debate the future in refugee camps and college halls alike. The story of Palestine is not just one of war and exile. It is a story of survival, of memory, of identity. It's a story without an ending, and perhaps it's not meant to end yet. In the heart of the Middle East lies a land no bigger than a whisper on a world map. But its history is thunder, its people a chorus of faiths, wounds, and dreams. And as the world watches, listens, and sometimes turns away, Palestine remains a question, a symbol, a promise unfulfilled.